Welcome to Mastering Agility. If you want to listen to authentic conversations with the most inspiring guests, find like-minded people in the Mastering Agility Discord community, or both online and face-to-face events, this is the platform for you. Grab a drink, sit back, and join professional Scrum trainers Sander Dorr, Jim Sammons, and their guests in an all-new episode.
Hey listeners, exciting news. The Agile Online Summit is just around the corner. This year's summit, running from October 22nd to October 24th, features thought leaders like Jürgen Appelo, known for revolutionizing the approach to Agile frameworks. You can expect insightful live sessions, including Jürgen's session on solving wicked complex problems in organizations. Get your free ticket and join the discussion at agileonlinesummit.com. Gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon.
Good morning in my case.
Chris, we're super happy that you're here. How are you doing?
Doing really well, thanks. Nice to meet you two.
Yeah, wonderful having you.
So we were just discussing about the work of Silicon Valley Product Group. You guys publish books like Transformed, Inspired, Empowered. What are books that you have read lately that you would feel other people should definitely have a look at as well that impacted you?
Interesting. Well, there's sort of business books, of course, and there are non-business books. But I'll take a business book, probably one that I read most recently that has had kind of an impact on my work is Build by Tony Fadell. If you have had a chance to read that, it's a really just wonderful kind of inside the game at Apple and a few other places. Sort of book on really what does it mean to be agile with a hardware company, and one of the things that Tony's a great writer and he's got just some great stories, great anecdotes that go all the way back into the 90s before he was at Apple. But it's also just so rare to get a look under the hood at Apple because they are so famously private. A book I've recently read, a nonfiction book that's not strictly in my, around this sort of business, is something called Being You by Anil Seth. And it's a book on consciousness and sort of neuroscience and kind of what the state of the art looks like there. Found the book just utterly fascinating. Recommend it for anybody who's interested in topics like that.
Something that triggered me while you were talking about it is the secrecy that Apple has. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing for the large conglomerates to keep their secrecy? Is that part of the secret sauce of Apple?
Hard to say. I don't think there are too many companies that could pull that off. I mean, there's just sort of a culture of discipline that has been, part of that place, really since the beginning. So I think there are probably a lot of companies out there that would like to be a little bit more secret about how they do things, but they're just, not able to hold it together. So they're really kind of a rare phenomenon. You don't really see it happening, too much. And whether or not it's part of their success, hard to say. I mean, I think Apple in the last couple of years, I think they're a little bit of shine is coming off of it. There's a bit more. They could sort of do no wrong, almost anywhere. I mean, everybody really loves them. But certain aspects of, especially how they're treating their developer audience and things like that, it's beginning to look a little bit more like a Death Star than it was before.
Do you feel in that sense? Because I think that Apple indeed is a very interesting example. Do you feel that people buy their products because of the products and what the products actually can do, or is that they buy an image, if you will?
I think with Apple, there is a certain amount of brand and belonging and, kind of where the brand space that they occupy, that people do want to identify with it. And I think the other reason is just the tightness of the experience that comes from how vertically integrated most of it is, specifically the hardware and the OS, kind of how all that stuff works together. Their integration and their kind of walled community, it does lock you out of bringing things in from a lot of other places, but things are just tight. Things just work together. That's also beginning to, I don't know about you, but my experience as an Apple consumer, that's not what it used to be. And we're kind of into a little bit different space than maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. But I would put it up to those two things: experience and brand.
No, I was just thinking about, because I'm an Apple user, not a fanboy, not a power user, but I got a phone, an iPad, and a MacBook. I also have some Windows stuff, and I was kind of thinking about, is the luster off? I don't know. I do think my next laptop will not be a MacBook. I got my initial MacBook in probably, 2008, because I was tired of feeling like I only knew one language, like I could only write with my right hand. I wanted to become ambidextrous because I was working in business, and it almost felt like back in the day when my parents said, "Hey, you got to learn to drive a stick because you never know when you're going to need to." And people to this day, like even as recently as last week, are like, "Well, what do you mean you have a Windows computer and a MacBook?" And it almost feels like I'm not loyal, like I'm not being loyal to either brand. I'm like,
right,
I love them both, just for different reasons.
Yeah. I get that. I've had that same. I'm pretty much the same as you, right? There are a lot of products, Apple products in my house, but it's not that I just go Apple first all the time. If there is something that I think is better, I'll certainly bring that in and kind of tolerate a little bit of the lack of integration in my own ecosystem. And there have been periods, especially when I was back, before I joined Silicon Valley Product Group, I had a product at a mobile company, and there was a period there where I had 3 phones that I was carrying around, different operating systems. And part of it, I approached it the way you're saying. It's like I feel like I need to have a few more skills. I feel like to really speak knowledgeably on this stuff, I need to go deep on multiple things. I have to say though, every time I followed that urge, I was always I got over it really quickly. It's like, okay, I did that. I'd spent 48 hours on, whatever, this or that phone. And it's like, it just really didn't feel as tight for me. And I was definitely somebody who appreciated kind of all the little hiccups being ironed out, especially with something as personal as a phone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it indeed that the ecosystem that these days is a lot more important, because we have a lot of stuff that's coming at us, right? And I can imagine, I'm very curious about your perspective, having a single ecosystem where you don't have to accept all those little hiccups, just lowers the amount of cognitive load that we have.
True, but as you're saying this, I'm realizing that I do have multiple ecosystems that I'm participating in. I do have a lot of Apple gear around here. I've got a lot of Google stuff, and I've got a lot of one-off things that are neither of those, even in cases when either Apple or Google or both are offering something competitive. So and it's tough. It's tough to keep track of it. I recently hit that crossover point. How you relate to how your parents relate to technology, and you're always a little bit annoyed with them that they aren't trying these things out, or they don't quite get that this is how you do it. I really have just noticed in the last 6 months, I have now become that guy to my kids. I was hanging in there for a long time, technical background and working in tech, but just kind of keeping track of all the complexities within an ecosystem, across these ecosystems. I'm now the old man. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen to all of us.
Mastering agility only works with organizations aligned with our values, and that's exactly why we are excited to work with our sponsor. Scrum Match is the free platform for professionals run by professionals. On Scrum Match, true Scrum Masters get hired by companies serious about the popular framework. The awesome people behind this platform have decades of experience, among them a professional Scrum trainer for Scrum.org. They have interviewed, trained, and coached hundreds of like-minded people, and they use this exact experience to make you stand out from the crowd and help you get in touch with companies looking for true Scrum Masters. So go to scrummatch.com and sprint to your dream job. Unfortunately, well, yeah. I got to say, in that regard, my dad, he's almost 75 now. He adopted his first smartphone earlier this year. And up until that point...
Wow, how's he doing?
I think I received 5 different videos from him, all lasting multiple minutes today. He he's restoring this old Navy vessel, right? And it's his hobby. It's one of the few things that he can actually still properly do, and he's very proud of that. But he keeps sending these videos. It's sweet, but also like very old at the same time. And up until that point, he had a very old school Nokia where all the paint was already rubbing off, the whole thing was falling apart. But he continued because he could not keep up with how these smartphones work. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, good for your dad. That's not a lot of 75-year-olds have that kind of courage.
Definitely true.
Chris, is the Sonos issue that's currently in the news almost daily for me, is that on your radar? Or
it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No. So here's the thing, though. So I'm also a big Sonos customer. I may own 6 or 8 products, from Sonos, and know the company reasonably well. The debacle was really about the app. A big refresh they did of the app, and lost ground in some places, and tweaked some people as far as what the experience is. So it's on my radar from a news perspective, but it's not on my radar from an actual experience perspective, because I really wasn't using the app. I was always just casting directly from, I was either using a voice interface for it, or I was casting directly from Spotify. Spotify has linkages into and it's not even really a cast. I mean, it's actually participating directly in. Effectively, you can use the Sonos app. The Spotify app as your front end to Sonos. So I haven't really gone in and figured out what it is people are so upset about, but you do, as a product person, you have to be very, very careful when you've got an audience that loves you and an audience that has created a whole, infrastructure within their house that is most likely took them a little while to set up, and their ways of interacting with it, they've gotten into some real habits. If you're going to go and dramatically change something like that, you have to have a very good reason, and B, you have to manage that experience of getting somebody migrated from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things. So I know your question was, is it on my radar? So I guess that's a yes, but I wouldn't say that I have personally directly felt it, because it didn't mess with the way that I used Sonos in any real significant way.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is when we see headlines like that, given what the three of us do, and I'm not saying we do the same thing, but we're in a generally similar sphere. And then CrowdStrike, a lot has been said on LinkedIn about, this is an early indicator of a problem. And this is the problem of letting certain vendors get too close to this, or being, too loyal to an ecosystem, and having diversity and resiliency and all those things. So when things like CrowdStrike or this Sonos stuff starts to hit your average consumer, not just the tech community, when you and Marty sit around, do you talk about, like, what is this an indicator of? Is this an indication of something? Is this an inflection point? Or are you just readers and consumers like the rest of us?
Oh, I see. Interesting. I kind of put these into different categories. So I don't know, maybe I'm not quite seeing the connection yet. Sonos, I think, is absolutely an example of what I think we are all about here. That was a failure in product discovery. The fact that there was always going to be a risk, right? Whenever you bring something out, whether it's a small feature or a complete redesign of an app or a new product, there is a whole constellation of risks and ways that this can fail. Some of them have to do with, is it bringing value? Some of them have to do with, do we really know what it takes to around the technical feasibility? Some of it relates to the business. And if we were to put this out there, is it going to interfere with how we go to market? And then this one, I think in the case of Sonos, was really one of experience. Did it actually work for people and their own cognitive models, to sort of consume the value of the product? And the bar was particularly high on Sonos because there was already a rabid fan base that was used to a particular experience. So to go in and disturb that so profoundly, They also, you could argue that there were some value risk problems too, because it went out actually with fewer capabilities. And these were certain capabilities that I don't know if it's a large part of their audience cared about or just a vocal part of their audience, but they got burned on both of those. And that's classic product fail, right? Those are things that really should be worked through in terms of talking with customers, in terms of showing them prototypes and kind of figuring out, looking at data, and understanding all of the implications of the choices that you're making and where all those risks are. So that one definitely fits there. The CrowdStrike one is a little bit trickier. That one, there was clearly just a sort of a normal breakdown here. Whether it was a breakdown in regression testing or just what. This is something that Microsoft et al. And even CrowdStrike as well. They've done this tens of thousands of times now, with a very, very large ecosystem. So clearly something broke down just in the process. I think one of the things, though, that you're asking about is when you've got so much brittleness and so much interdependency, within a particular ecosystem, does it make it inevitable that something like this is going to happen? And I would say those are interesting questions, but they may be a little far afield from the types of things I would be talking with Kagan about on a regular basis. Who knows, though? We haven't actually had a conversation on it. So there may be something interesting. I'm curious, though, did that get at anything I just said there, get at kind of the essence of your question? Or is there kind of a point that you're looking for, an observation you've made?
Hell, Chris, I don't know if I ever have a point, but I'll tell you how in my brain these things are connected. So as CrowdStrike was going on, I was reading the book, Seeing Around Corners. And something that hit home as I'm literally out doing yard work and listening to this book and seeing messages from friends and others dealing with the real effects of CrowdStrike, it kind of led me to realize you have to first put yourself in a position to see an inflection point or a change in the bigger picture. And then you have to know what you're seeing and you have to know what to do with that signal you're getting. So I think both of those are ways of saying, do we see a risk here? So if you were fully invested in the Sonos ecosystem, when they make a mistake or stumble, a big mistake, it has a really, if I wanted to bundle up all my Sonos gear and stick it on Facebook Marketplace, I could wash my hands of Sonos. But then what if I go to work the next day and say, hey, IT administrator, hey, leader, hey, CIO, what are we doing to prevent something that just happened from happening again in another part of our business or a similar part of business? Because I didn't have such a visceral reaction to the technical side of CrowdStrike myself, but I understood and heard from many people that says, see, this is the problem. This is the problem of being too dependent on a single platform, or look at when Teams goes down, half the world stops, or when, whatever. And all of these things are ecosystems. Apple, we talked about, Sonos, you could see CrowdStrike as being an ecosystem or a putting all your eggs in one basket issue, even though, like you said, the root cause there is very different. So I guess I'm just wondering if any of these things add up when you're sitting around thinking about stuff to a change in consumer behaviors to wanting the products we use to be more open from an ecosystem standpoint. Like if you had told me when I started my tech career in the late 90s that I'd be able to do on a Mac with Microsoft Office, I would have said, no way in hell is that going to happen. There's no way. Because back then, it felt like Gates versus Jobs, right? And now the lines are blurring. iMessage is the last big thing for me. If I can somehow consume and use and respond to iMessages on my Windows PC, I will feel as a consumer, I can make the best choice for me in any reason. Now, that's my issue. Other people may have other things that keep them in or out of a certain group. But so I guess the root of my question is, are any of these things connected to consumer behaviors, product development, or am I not seeing something?
Both Jim and I are experienced consultants and trainers. Therefore, we know how important it is for organizations to have the fundamentals in place before delivering high-value products. And this starts with understanding the theory behind whatever framework, method, or process organizations apply. And this is where Xebia comes in. Xebia is a pioneering software engineering and IT consultancy company, transforming and executing at the intersection of domain and technology to create digital leaders for our people, clients, partners, and communities. As a gift for our Mastering Agility audience, they provided us with a discount code MA10 when signing up for their open enrollment classes to get 10% off. Go to xebia.com/academy to find the entire curriculum of courses. That is Xebia, xebia.com/academy to find all their courses.
As you're talking here, the framing that seems to make sense here is sort of one of kind of, we'll call it redundancy versus sort of, centralization or redundancy versus standardization, right? That's what it comes down to. And standardization gives you the obvious benefits of things working, you having to be less trained up on lots of stuff. There's a much simpler ecosystem that you as a consumer or as a CIO, whatever, have to maintain. But it comes at the cost of this brittleness. And when and where does it make sense to inject redundancy? Just differences, lack of consistency, so that you actually can tolerate these things. And also, in the case of CrowdStrike, you can limit the blast radius of any sort of failure. And I'm not sure there's a single one of those is always best. I think there's probably thinking of it as a spectrum and deciding where you want to anchor yourself on that spectrum, given the nature of the risk. I still don't really see these as that similar. I mean, I think this framing works really well for IT infrastructure and stuff like that. If you can identify a single point of failure, like what happened with CrowdStrike, that's perhaps a place that you do want to look at your ecosystem and see if there are ways to keep the blast radius smaller. In the case of Sonos, the reason why I feel like it's a little bit different is I don't know if the right answer to preventing that problem would have been more diverse ecosystems on the part of the customers. I think people who were fans of the Sonos products, even if you just had one tool, right? You just had one standalone bookshelf speaker, you'd probably be just as upset with that company right now if it was one of your favorite products. So I'm not sure that I see Sonos's troubles right now as one of a monolithic ecosystem or a standardized ecosystem. I see that one as just straight up lack of really understanding the implications of what you're going to put out into the market.
Yeah, it really depends as well, I guess. Jen's favorite word, it depends on how you use the product. Because you can use this is the true consultant answer. Huh?
Exactly.
You can use the Sonos app and to control it. But personally, I use Spotify 9 times out of 10, and I can just select the speaker there from that point on, continue and blast my music or whatever podcast I'm listening to on that speaker. So I don't need the Sonos interface to actually control the thing. So it really depends on how you use it. But yeah, there are a plethora of these kind of examples right now.
Exactly. And I'm exactly like you, right? That's why the Sonos thing hit me mostly from reading the news and not as a Sonos customer.
No, exactly. But there are a plethora of these kind of examples at the moment. Like NVIDIA, I think it was yesterday where they completely, I think it was $270 billion in net worth that they lost. So it's going up and down at the moment, and with very popular organizations, popular frameworks as well. Agile is going down at the moment. New buzzwords start to rise, and that's my segue into the product operating model. Product is the new thing. Product management, product operating model. Tell us what it is and how we can actually leverage it.
Yeah. So product operating model, I actually don't think it's very new. I think maybe that term is new. It's really just been in the last year and a half, 2 years that more and more of the industry is coalescing around that actual label. But the concepts in there are things that, SVPG, my firm, has been really talking about for 20 years. So the way we break it up at the highest level, it really comes. So first of all, just looking at an operating model, we can start from there as what do we mean by an operating model? It's really internally to a company, how are you organized? How are you organized functionally? How are you organized cross-functionally? And how do you generally get things done? In terms of products, how do you decide what to build and then ultimately get that stuff built? So, there are many, many different ways. If you were to just go and look at your own company and you were to answer those questions, how does all that stuff happen? You're really describing an operating model. And, one of the things that Silicon Valley Product Group recognized really early is that there were kind of two classes of company, especially on the real tech forward companies, at least early on. The companies that we saw that were just routinely doing amazing stuff in terms of creating value on behalf of their customers were just organized differently. They were doing things internally that were different. They weren't all exactly the same, mind you, but there were some core principles that were really quite different from how sort of the rest of the companies operated. And at the highest level, it really came down to what was the sort of motivating incentive engine inside of the company? What was it that people saw their job as? In the legacy models, it was primarily around output. Are we releasing on time? How many features? Did we get through the P0 and P1 requirements in the roadmap? All of those sorts of things is really like, if you're an engineer, that's what you're occupied with. That's how your manager is measuring you. That's what the business is looking to you to provide. It's all about output. If you really think it through, though, and you can imagine a company, a product and tech organization that's just awesome as far as output, they can still be building all the wrong things and not really moving the company forward at all, right? So that's really one of the big insights on the product model. The product model creates incentives and forces and measurement and all of this around outcome. So what is the thing that you're trying to achieve by shipping this particular product or this particular feature? And it might be a revenue-based outcome, or it might be other financial things, cost, whatnot, but it might be something else. It might be about customer acquisition, or it might be improving how long it takes to onboard a new customer, onboard a new partner into the system. All of those sorts of things can be outcomes, and there's really, sky's the limit on outcomes. But the whole point of the product operating model is that it frames things and it expects things of people around outcomes. Now, this is all just words, right? But when you really try and put that into practice, you realize that a lot of behavior necessarily has to change. And in some cases, the types of people who are working at the company may not be, people who are really good at output may not be the ones who are going to be all the same people who you want to actually aim at these outcome-oriented, approaches. So that's the highest level. We're moving from output to outcome. In doing that, though, there's still a lot of altitudes that you can be operating at, and I'll do these really quickly. The first one is kind of the one that most people think of. It's how do you build? How are your engineering teams organized? How often are you shipping? How well is your product instrumented when you actually put it into the into the field, into the market, into whatever it's you're a bunch of users or a bunch of customers or whatever, right? It's the how you build part. The second dimension is how do you solve problems? And what this means is, what is the unit of work that's allocated onto teams? Is it a feature to be built or a roadmap to be executed on, as most of us are used to? Or is it a problem that needs to be solved? And furthermore, if we're going to give a team a problem to solve, we're actually going to empower that team to decide what the best solution to that problem is, right? And that's a big, big step. And naturally, once you do that, what that team does in order to be successful is very, very different than what it does to be successful in the output regime. So that's the second. First was, how you build. The second one is how you solve problems. The third level is really getting to overall, kind of leadership and the relationship between, quote unquote, the business parts of the company and the technology parts of the company. It's who decides what problems to solve? How do you decide what problems to solve? And really, this speaks much more to having a cohesive product strategy. Most companies really don't have one. They've got a lot of different initiatives that they're working on at any given point. They've gone through a big prioritization, sort of exercise in order to get us down to these 50 initiatives. And we're going to dole that out all into the teams. When you truly have a product strategy, it looks a lot different. It's not really coming directly from the individual businesses. It's more the actual product organization itself, product and tech, that are deciding these are the places we're focusing on, and they're going to do it in a way that works with the business. So a lot behind all three of these things that I said, but that's the fundamental cut at the product operating model. How you build, how you solve problems, how you decide what problems to solve.
And that's it for now. We'll continue this conversation in the next episode.
That is all for today. Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, let us know by hitting that like button. Share it with friends and colleagues, sharing a message on LinkedIn, joining our warm and welcoming Discord community, or attend recordings as a virtual audience. You can find all the relevant links in the show notes. We hope you'll tune back in for the next episode of the Mastering Agility podcast.